In the shadowy corridors of history, where truth and fiction blur, lies a tale so unsettling it seems ripped from the pages of a dystopian novel. Welcome to this episode where we unravel the enigmatic threads of MK Ultra, a covert operation that bends the mind, reality, and everything we believe about the sanctity of our own thoughts. Initiated in the cold, calculating halls of the CIA during the height of the Cold War, MK Ultra was the code name for an illegal and clandestine program of experiments on human subjects designated to identify and develop techniques to control the human mind. From LSD to hypnosis, from secret detention centers to manipulation, the depths of this program were just as vast as they were dark. As we peel back the layers of secrecy, we're going to navigate the labyrinth of ethical quandaries, personal tragedies, and a quest for power that could be the plot of a sci-fi thriller. Only the stories, victims, and the experiments, all completely real. So brace yourself as we step into the shadows of one of the most controversial chapters of intelligence history. This is not just a journey into the past. It's a mirror reflecting the perennial struggle over the sanctity of the human psyche and the lengths of which institutions will go in the name of national security. We are the Conspiracy Realists. My name is Shane Skwarek, and once again joined by my co-host, Mr. Tim Phillips. And I always want to just scream, Mr. Phillips, without having to blow everybody's ears out by doing it.
One day we'll have a t-shirt that says that.
Just the Mr. all the way across.
Yes.
For those unfamiliar, it's an old wrestling catchphrase that I've sort of amended to Mr. Phillips. I don't think there's going to be any quandary with that because the guy's name was Kennedy, your name's Phillips. There's probably no copyright issue there.
I think we're all good. I don't want to involve myself in anything regarding Kennedy's since this is a conspiracy podcast.
That's true.
But I'm sure we will cover that at length at some point in time.
At some point, we're going to dive there. So today, I guess it kind of falls in line in that same era, honestly, of the Kennedys. MK Ultra. It's one of the few conspiracies that we're going to tackle early on that honestly isn't even a conspiracy. It's
right.
True. It's actually meant to be true.
Right.
Not even meant to be true. It's actually proven true. And for those kind of unfamiliar with what MK Ultra is, if you didn't get it from the intro, it was the CIA's mind control program, and probably one of the most chilling and well-documented conspiracy theories in American history. It was officially sanctioned in 1953, and MK Ultra was this covert operation, if you will, that was aimed at developing techniques for mind control, interrogation, psychological torture. The program was part of this broader Cold War strategy to counteract some of the Soviet psychological advancements that were controlling human behavior. So obviously we weren't the only ones doing this here. Soviets were doing it as well. And the justification of it always is, like most things, if we can get ahead of it before our opponents can, then we're at an advantage. What I think we're going to tackle today, Tim, is really just all the conspiracies that have come up around MK Ultra. And that's sort of been the theme, honestly, about what even got us into this. And, last episode we referenced the octopus murders and how that kind of sucked us in because one thing led to the next and it started to make you question everything. And that seems to be the same case here is, MK Ultra was a conspiracy, right?
At one point.
Conspiracy at one point. Right. And then it was proven true. And so all those people that thought that this was a conspiracy, immediate validation. And so now you have to start to question all of the crazy things that happened that might be an arm's length away from MK Ultra. Are they conspiracies too? And so I don't even know where to begin here.
Yeah.
There's so many options to talk about. Probably the one that stuck with me the most. And this one came from a conversation we had on Xbox about half a year ago, I'd say 6 months ago. There was a string of serial killer documentaries that were coming out. It actually probably dates back even longer than that, maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
And of course, everybody that has a Netflix subscription or borrows a friend's Netflix subscription, we got sucked into watching them. Yeah, I'm a borrower too. Sorry, Netflix. But they are cracking down on it. So that'll be another conspiracy for another day. But we got sucked into watching them. I think everyone kind of did, and just kind of learning a little about the psyche. And one of the most captivating things, I think, for me was how you took these people who on the surface were, super sane, super social people, and in some cases a really big part of society. You think John Wayne Gacy, for example.
Right.
I mean, he was a local politician. He was loved by everybody, ran successful businesses. The clown thing was a portion of his life that I think they used to kind of make him look a little more evil. But for the most part...
We always talk about that, right? Like, that wasn't his thing,
It wasn't. Yeah, it's amazing to me that, like, that was such a small part of the actual...
right. Before I knew really much of anything about him, I thought that he was a guy who dressed up as a clown and murdered kids, right? Like, I really thought that's what it was.
I thought too. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, because that's how they portrayed him, right? I think, to your point, right? Maybe they just wanted to sell more books about him, or you know what I mean, get more viewers on a 60 Minutes, interview about him or whatever it might be. But I really thought that was a thing.
Yeah. It's that's the weird part about all this. But to that, Gacy was so entrenched in his community, and he was so entrenched in just all the people around him. And so for him to obviously be outed now as this crazy serial killer was a huge hit. And so how does one flip that switch, right? How does that happen? One of the more popular ones was the Manson murders, right? So
huge.
All of a sudden you had Charles Manson, who was in prison and who was rumored to be experimented on. And he kind of breaks out and he leads this cult. And all of a sudden he just starts convincing people to create these executions, literally executions of people in Hollywood, in and around LA, for really no real reason at the time. They were obsessed. And so that's where I really want to kind of begin.
Yeah.
We've talked about it at nauseum here, but for the audience, could these serial killers, this string of serial killers that happened in kind of that 70s era, which is the tail end of the MK Ultra era, obviously.
Yeah.
But could that have been influenced by MK Ultra?
Yeah, so I look, to me, and we've talked about this obviously, right? Like, that's the most fascinating conspiracy inside the former conspiracy that is MK Ultra, right? And the most prevalent time for serial killers in the United States, right? Decades, we're talking, were the 70s and the 80s, right? If you do your research there, and hey, look, right? Are there serial killers out there right now that we didn't know about? Of course there are. Were there plenty before then? Absolutely. But the nation and the world has never quite seen a rash of serial killers arise like we did in those 2 decades. And what occurred, what was a huge thing that was happening or going on the 2 decades prior, MK Ultra, right? So, you take a look at those people, right? And Gacy's a great example. Ted Bundy's a great example. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, is probably since I really started doing a lot of research on him. Which, shout out to Netflix. Whoa, we better get sponsored by Netflix soon. We talked about it twice already. Great, there's a fantastic docu-series about Ted Kaczynski on right now, depending upon when you guys actually watch this. But he's a fantastic. Losing train of thought here, but a fantastic example, if you will, of somebody who was certainly manipulated by someone or some program. For those who are unaware, he was incredibly intelligent, had a genius IQ of, I think it was like above 167. It was absolutely off the charts. He went to college, went to Harvard. I believe it was by the age of 16. He was already attending Harvard. It was absolutely wild. And during his Harvard years, and this is not a conspiracy, this is proven, he was a part of experimental, quote-unquote, mind control, I don't want to say treatments, but more of kind of like a program or a test program, if you will. Now, granted, it was never proven to be that was necessarily MK Ultra, but you can see a switch. If you follow that man's life, he went off the deep end, right, after that point in time. He went absolutely, completely off the deep end after, at that point in time.
Yeah, it's funny because I did a little research kind of coming to this podcast specifically about that, serial killers who had some sort of a background in the military. And I didn't expect to come up much. Obviously, Kaczynski was one of the big ones that we had kind of thought about coming into this. And the fact that he actually had mind control experiments done to him is a telltale sign, if nothing else. But then when I did my research, David Berkowitz was the son of Sam. He was in the U.S.
another
Army
one
from 71 to 74, specialist E4, as I'm seeing here, and he didn't start killing until his discharge, which was in 76 is his first murder. So he was discharged in 74, 76 he starts murdering. Again, not a long time in the military and not in that time frame that existed for MK Ultra, but all of a sudden a military man comes out and starts killing. Gary Ridgway, he was the Green River Killer, which isn't
Green
as
River
popular,
Killer, yep.
I'm sure. Yep. 49 murders he was convicted of. He's confessed to killing 71. Obviously, there's some logistics around the confession versus actually being able to verify it. But he was in the Navy. He was stationed in Vietnam, returned to the U.S., and all of a sudden, one of the most prolific killers out there, which, again, oddly, his name isn't as synonymous when you think serial killers as some of the other guys. Dennis Rader was the BTK killer, and he was an Air Force guy from 66 to 70. Again, not a long time in the military. And then by 74, only a couple years after he's out of there, he starts killing. And that goes on actually till 91. BTK is bind, torture, kill. So he actually used a lot of military techniques to bind.
He did, yeah.
Which is, obviously how they ended up finding them. So, correlation without causation, it's hard to always pin something on that. But
I'll add one more to that list. And this isn't somebody that, I'll be completely honest, this might be digging a little bit deeper as we're talking about this, right? Somebody who I didn't initially think, because I feel like I kind of know a lot about him, was Jeffrey Dahmer. I didn't initially think, just based upon his story, that, he really kind of fit into that box of potentially being affected by, some kind of MK Ultra experiments. Dude was in the military, right? So, we're looking at people that were in some sort of government-run institution, military. We harken back to Charles Manson, right? He was in and out of jail constantly, right? So what's the common denominator here? It's all of these men, right? All of these white men who were involved in some sort of government-run institution, whether it be military or jail, right? That's a startling discovery.
It's very fascinating, and on the tales of coming out of MK Ultra, and a lot of them too. Again, not all of them, but you look at like somebody like a Dahmer, for example. Socially awkward type personality. It's what everyone kind of says about him, but they never envision him being violent. Right. And so it's kind of fascinating to see the sort of the spectrum as you go from somebody that's like really prolific in a John Wayne Gacy in his community, and somebody like Jeffrey Dahmer who's kind of reserved, and all of a sudden how they have that like snap trigger right away.
Right.
And it just kind of makes you wonder, was something happening behind the scenes? I don't know personally that I can say yes or no. I mean, do you feel strongly about that?
I kind of do. Look, there's no concrete evidence, right? The most prevalent being, in my opinion, Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and Charles Manson. And the reason why I say that is, well, Kaczynski, we already talked about it. We know that he was a part of some kind of mind control experiment, right? But if you take a look at Charles Manson, and not only him as a killer, right, but him as a cult leader, and really what he preached, what was he all about? He was about exactly what MK Ultra was about. He was about mind experiments, mind control, and the use of psychedelics to gain control over his followers, right? So, I mean, it's almost a direct line from what they were doing in MK Ultra and what that program was about. I mean, let's not forget, right? Like, MK Ultra literally was a mind control experiment with the intent of creating assassins, right? Like, that's what they wanted to do. The U.S. government, the CIA, wanted to literally control people like you and I, see if they could literally wipe our memory using psychedelic drugs, implant new memories, and then find a way to actually control us, flip that switch, and turn you into an assassin. Now, I wouldn't say that I necessarily believe that these serial killers, yes, they were. I don't think that they could have been a product of MK Ultra. I don't think it was on purpose, though, right? Like, I don't think that the CIA was successful in turning them into assassins and that they flipped that switch. I think that they went completely insane from what was done to them, right? Yeah, I mean, if you really dig deep into the MK Ultra, I mean, the different kinds of, we keep talking surface level. Yes, they experimented on people with psychedelics, but the way in which they did it, I mean, they would keep people on LSD. Some people they kept on LSD for 74 days straight, right? So it's not like they're just dosing you with a hit you would take at at Lollapalooza. I don't know if that's a real thing, but it sounded good in my mind, right? But you know what I mean? It's not like they weren't giving you like a party type dose. Like they were experimenting with these doses, right? They were experimenting with how you actually took those doses and what you did, right? So not only would they give you LSD, but then they would keep you awake, right? They would give you amphetamines, and then they would give you something else to put you to sleep. And right before you fell asleep, they'd shoot you up with more amphetamines to wake you back up, all while you were on LSD. So these people were literally tortured. So, point being, I don't necessarily think that the CIA was successful in creating these, Manchurian candidate type assassins. I just think it was a byproduct of these horrific experiences that all these people went through.
It's an interesting thought, being a byproduct and not necessarily control. And kind of made me think a little bit because, going into it, I would have thought if they did it, they were successful, right? I mean, it's not like there's not a history of that happening. You had a lot of thought reform. I mean, Nazi Germany is probably the biggest example of thought reform. I mean, you literally convinced entire people to turn in their friends and family based on their religion. But Chinese thought reform during the 50s, they literally had programs aimed at political prisoners where they would bring them in and they'd brainwash them, re-educate them, put them in these re-education camps, and then send them back out. And after they indoctrinated them with these communist ideologies, through torture, through any sort of psychological warfare, or the psychological pressure, sometimes through drugs, and send them back out, and they'd be championing them. North Korea did it with their prison camps. Obviously the Soviet Union did it too. And again, it's documented that America did it. Our American POWs had it done in the Korean War. So, I don't know. You've seen through history, you mentioned Charles Manson kind of building out this cult. And I don't want to deviate too much off into cults entirely, but as I started to look into MK Ultra a lot and just sort of the techniques that were used in manipulating people, you always ask yourself, can that happen to me? Number one, or am I too smart for that? And does it happen in any other context? And for me, the answer was those cults. Whether you want to look at Jonestown, which was a mass murder of a cult where everyone just sort of followed them to their death, and you can make the argument that they didn't know what they were doing, or you can look really recently at like NXIVM, where Keith Raniere literally convinced these people to join his cult, and then it morphed into this sex cult where he had these women convincing other women to do his dirty work for him. And that's not always the case where it's like, I don't want to say nonviolent crime because that is violent crime in one sense, but non-murderous crime. They weren't going out killing people necessarily, but you were convincing these people. And as you watch these people kind of come out of this indoctrination where for years they thought they were in the right, doing the right thing, and they were honoring this mission and they had all this purpose, and they were being preyed upon their insecurities, and they were being conditioned to address these insecurities in such a way, right? And you see how they've sort of come out of it, and they're just like, oh my God, like I feel like I was brainwashed. And you always ask like, oh God, like how could that possibly happen? And that kind of struck me as the answer. Is like even cults seemingly use the same psychological techniques and succeed on such a grand scale. And we're not talking in the 50s, 60s, 70s where there was no access to the internet and you really only talk to your neighbor and you kind of believe what they said. We're talking about a couple years ago when this was happening in cults right here. And some would argue it's still happening in things like Scientology, or there's all these other like small, I hesitate to call them religious groups. They position themselves or posture themselves as religious groups. But it's even like the multi-level marketing things, right?
Yeah.
They condition these people to believe in this bigger purpose, and they sacrifice themselves. They sacrifice their finances. They sacrifice their livelihoods. And they put all this effort in because they believe they're working towards this greater good. It's fascinating to me, and it's interesting that you kind of bring up that it might be a byproduct of that, where these guys might have snapped. But then I kind of posture back to you is, if these guys snapped and they're the outliers, how many guys didn't? And do we just maybe not know? I mean, again, like we know for sure that the CIA has people that have worked for them that don't exist, right? They're somebody that's been in the CIA. They're high-level intelligence. Maybe they're spies in other countries. I mean, we've literally had it here in the United States where we've had people come in and infiltrate our society as socialist elites, or socialite elites, and all of a sudden they've been like a Russian spy and a woman. I forgot her name off the top of my head. I can look it up in a minute if it's that important. But we've seen that happen, and then they don't exist anywhere else because then you can't look them up. You can't take their picture and go find them on social media because they don't exist. And so I'm wondering then, if these serial killers are byproducts of that, how many exist that we don't know about? And maybe, like everything else, if MK Ultra was dubbed dead, what has preceded it? And we can talk about what came before too. MK Ultra wasn't the first, was it?
No. So I mean, first and foremost, before we even talk about that, right? When the official narrative is that MK Ultra ended, and I don't remember the date off the top of my head. And then we found out years later, due to improperly stored records, because the CIA actually filed some classified documents about MK Ultra with financial records. We found out it was still going on for another decade, quite literally another decade afterwards, right?
Wild.
So, yeah. So it went on a lot longer than what we were told. And to your point, did it really end? Did it end, or did it morph and take on a new form, or what other secret government programs are going on right now? I mean, my God, we can go anywhere with it, right? I mean, if we want to look at just a couple of years ago, we could talk about COVID, right? And was that if we want to get really crazy with it, I'm sure you and I can spend 3 weeks of episodes on that alone. But fascinating as much as MK Ultra is. If you take a look at, and I don't remember if it was called like Operation, but I believe it was like Operation, oh my goodness, Artichoke,
and before that was even Operation Bluebird.
Very good.
So they had two different operations. Now they were slightly tweaked, as they always are, so they weren't the exact same thing, and that's how they kind of circumvent public inquiry on a lot of these things. So they had Bluebird, and I'm trying to pull up the date for Bluebird here for me real quick. There they are. I don't have the dates in front of me right here. Oh,
we needed Jamie like Joe Rogan does.
We really do, right? Just send somebody. I guess
like we could just like relax. Like Jamie, what year is that? Can you pull that up for me real quick?
I'll pull that up over there. So Bluebird was initiated in 1950, and Artichoke before MK Ultra was sanctioned in 53. So I mean, these things came literally bang, 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 1, 2, 3 right after each other. Probably because something changed within the midst of them, and maybe they had to tweak the verbiage on it. We can, you talk about programs and how they kind of morph. Look at the UFO program where there was Project Blue Book, and then they shuttered that, and they said they weren't doing anything, and then they had ATIP, and they had other programs that they just changed the name about, that they just admitted to just a couple years ago. And so, again, when they admit something or they get caught on something, all they tend to do is change the name on it.
Right. They tell you that it ended, and then change the name. Right. And then years later you find out, oh, there's something new, and this is what they called it.
Right. And you don't have to look very far to find out what an addict would do for their drugs, right? How often do you see somebody going on a robbery streak, or they murder somebody, or they're in rehab and they just fake their way through it, and they seem like they're recovered, and they come out, and the day they come out, they're right back on whatever they're addicted to. And so the idea of addicting somebody to that drug and latching them onto that, people do some crazy things when they're desperate, and they're willing to do some crazy things, whether they know it or not. And I've never been in that situation, I guess, fortunately, or at least that I know about. So maybe, who knows, you're going to say the magic word, and I'm going to like zone out and become, what is that? Not Jack Ryan. What's that other one? Oh, they got a whole TV series with it.
You're a movie guy, not me. You're the movie TV guy.
Oh, man, it's going to slip my mind. It's going to be on the tip of my tongue the whole way through.
Sorry, I can't be your wingman on this one, dude. You're on your own on that.
But you're not going to flip your switch and become this like super assassin necessarily. Maybe you're just going to be this average guy that's just going to walk up and is just going to go pull off an assassination for somebody.
Right.
We've heard that, we talked about Kennedy kind of joking around earlier, but there's talks that the Kennedy assassination was that a byproduct of MK Ultra.
The dates fit, right?
The dates fit.
And, you talked about, we talked about Operation. I want to call it oregano all the time. I know it's not oregano. I don't know why. I know the difference between oregano and artichoke. In my mind, I call it Operation Oregano. But it was actually Operation not Oregano, Artichoke. Was actually run by the same guy that ran MK Ultra. I can't tell you his name off the top of my head right now, but it's actually run by the exact same person. And if you look at what the idea behind Operation Artichoke was, it was the opposite of erasing somebody's mind and implanting new information there in order to control them. Mm-hmm. It was an operation to almost create like a truth serum, if you will, and try to get information out of people. And after failing at that, he had an idea and said, oh shit, if I can't do that, maybe I could just implant new ideas into somebody's brain, and I could utilize these chemicals to do it, and I can get them to do whatever I want to do, right? And so, you kind of talked about, being an addict, not be able to give up. Well, we'll kind of look at these people that funded these programs and actually did. They're kind of addicts themselves, right? Like they don't stop. So who knows what's going on right now?
Is it Sidney Gottlieb? Is that Gottlieb?
I believe you're right.
Is that who you're talking about? Yeah, that's the only name I was able to come up with.
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. It's always funny to see how these figureheads sort of bounce around from one to the next, especially when they have a lot of knowledge or they're super bright people. And I don't know if it's that their knowledge is being exploited and maybe they think they're doing good for somebody else, or if they really just are malicious. I mean, we saw that out of Nazi Germany. We swooped in and it was a race between us and the Soviets to grab the best scientists that were crafting these weapons of chaos that were causing craziness all over the place, and just incorporate them, wipe out their records, give them new Americanized names, and immediately put them on our own weapon systems.
Operation Paperclip.
Operation Paperclip, exactly.
Yeah.
So, Harvey Oswald, just to step back really quickly,
Yeah.
was a military man. That's another,
Very-
that's why I say
very true.
the assassination of itself and why there's so much thought about it. Like, if the CIA was behind JFK's assassination, well, you got a guy that didn't necessarily have great shot. And we can argue that the bullets and how many shooters there were to the end of teeth. Lee Harvey Oswald literally was, again, a very passive guy, very Jeffrey Dahmer-like and very socially awkward, very to himself. Apparently wasn't a very great shot. And then all of a sudden comes in, executes the president in a very public way, and when he's like brought in, has no idea what's going on, like, and said that routinely. And it's again, now I've never been in that situation and I hope never to be, but maybe he's overwhelmed. Maybe he's just full of it. I don't know. But it just seems odd that somebody that would have that much hate or disdain for themselves, typically when you see somebody that does that maliciously, right? They want to claim power. They're doing it because they're power hungry. They like to take the credit for it because they want to go down in history and be notorious. And I think even on the serial killer topic, there are serial killers that I would say, like, they did, like the Zodiac killer, for example. Like, the Zodiac killer wanted you to know what he did. Some of these other guys were hiding it, and they tried to just sort of entrench it in their life, and they just got caught because they screwed up, right? And so I think there's a fine line between that. And I think, one doesn't necessarily prove or dispel the other. But it's just always interesting to me that across the boundaries, everybody that has had these massive, not everybody, I should say, but all of these people that have had these military backgrounds seem to have either tried to keep it covert or just plead the fifth. Like, I don't even know what happened. I don't know. And they take that to their grave in some cases where it's like, no, it wasn't me. Like, what do you mean it wasn't you? Like, we have evidence it's you. Like, we literally got camera, more or less, that it was you.
Right.
Yeah.
No, you're right. That's a really good thought. And also, as you talk about, and you mentioned a few of the serial killers again, and that kind of made me think about kind of what their philosophies were. And the three that kind of really stand out to me the most is if you take a look at Manson, you take a look at the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, and you take a look at David Berkowitz, right? And you look at their ideology. And then you take a look at what their reasoning was for doing what they did. It's the mind of somebody who is clearly not sane, right? And look, to murder anybody, unless it's in self-defense, right? You're not a sane person, right? I think we can all agree upon that. But it's such psycho insanity, right? I mean, David Berkowitz literally told people that. Do you remember why? That he killed people because there was a demon that lived inside of his dog that he was speaking to that told him to go out and kill people, okay?
Right.
If you take a look at Charles Manson, he was huge on this race riot thing, and he was almost like somebody who was a schizo, thinking that the race wars were going to occur and that they were going to be out for him, right? Schizophrenia, just complete psychobabble, insane nonsense. The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, went off the deep end about climate change, of all things, right? And that's why he decided to kill people. So, and I'm sure if we do a deep dive into, the ideology and psychosis of all these, I'm sure we'll find a lot more. But those are just such extreme things that, to me, these were folks who were normal people, with the exception of Manson. He was kind of in and out of jail for most of his life, and he was pretty, messed up to begin with. But the other two, in terms of Berkowitz and Kaczynski, these were normal people who, just had these wild, insane theories. I don't know if I'd call talking to your dog a theory, but, like, where does that come from, right? Like, to me, it's, you were drugged, dude. You were drugged and tortured, and you snapped, and a bolt went loose, And look, obviously can't say that for sure, but, it's very odd. Yeah.
Can you, though? Because if you look at the history of medicine alone, we'll use the United States, but you can argue the whole world. We used to give lobotomies to people that were going through depression, where you're literally drilling a hole in their brain so they can't think anymore and they're just happy. We didn't understand what depression was, right? And you can argue all the causes and stuff like that in some other day, but at the end of the day, we can all agree that it's something that exists, right? Depression, anxiety, and some degree of mental illness exists, and we now know how to manage it for the most part. This is only in the 40s that they're taking a drill, a literal drill, and putting it in somebody's head. And that's, they would put them in a mental institution, drill their freaking head, and what happens next, who knows? I mean, this was an actual medical procedure. Electroshock therapy. Right. Like if you had bad thoughts, they'd literally electrocute your brain so you didn't have those thoughts anymore. So to me, that is a form of human experimentation. You hear that a lot with a lot of the old mental institutions. They all got shut down for whatever the reason might be, but it ended up being some degree of human experimentation, or doctors were doing something crazy in the back end. And don't think for one single solitary second that didn't parlay into some sort of medicine we have today. And don't think it's probably not happening somewhere in the world. We have a lot of advancements in science. Sometimes it's at the sacrifice of humanity that we just don't know about. And so I don't know that the idea that somebody is talking to his dog is that far-fetched. Again, if you consider he's in the military, I don't really know his military background enough, especially off the top of my head, to say, maybe he saw some crazy things with PTSD. But if he did have some sort of an MK Ultra experiment and he was brainwashed and he had some sort of, maybe, I mean, I don't really think he had any correlation to drugs, but if there's any sort of a mental manipulation, perhaps there was somebody that would come there and that would literally whisper in his ear and say to him, or call him on the phone and say to him what he needs to be doing, who his targets are. And maybe it wasn't for a military operative. Maybe it was just a way for them to decide how they were going to control him, and if they could, to use him for a bigger picture. If we can get him to do A, B, and C, and we can keep him level, maybe we can use him for a bigger project. And maybe the way they did it, the way they hypnotized him, was through saying that his dog was talking to him. And that could totally be the reason. That's why he's saying my dog. Maybe it wasn't his dog. Maybe he just zoned out and he's just staring and he's looking at his dog who's sitting in front of him. I mean, my dogs are sitting right outside my door right now. They're always waiting. They hear you talking, they come up to you and they wait and they look at you and they think they're going to get something. And maybe that was the way he was always able to rationalize it in his mind, is like, I'm being told. I'm going to wrestling reference again. I hear voices in my head. They come to me. They understand. Randy Orton's theme music. That never rings truer than something like that. Like, you hear these voices that are coming to you and you need to rationalize where they're coming from, especially if you have that brainwashing. And I don't know how much I buy into hypnosis in and of itself. I think I believe it. I would never try it because I'm mortified that if I do believe it and it is true and it's what might happen, what's the residual of that? You never know what the other person on the other end, even if you never, never. But you hear people that get it done and it changes, that they quit smoking, they go through weight loss progressions because it deactivates something in your mind. And I'm a big believer that as humans, we all have addictive personalities. We're addicted to something, and that doesn't necessarily mean drugs or alcohol or the devil's juices, whatever those might be. Could be anything. Could be anything. I love terrible reality TV. A great addiction. But yeah, I mean, I am a true believer that we all have an addiction and we have addictive personalities, and it's very easy. We're addicted to the routine of things, right? We like things to be predictable, or we like things to kind of guide us along. It's just in human nature. And I feel like a lot of anything, religion, what is that? It's about creating structure in your life and believing in something to guide you when you are unsure. Eating addictions, what is that typically correlated to, right? They usually say it's about depression or anxiety or stress, where you use that as sort of a way to level yourself out. And they say the same thing about drinking and alcohol. And when people go away to rehabs, what do they usually try to do? They try to change that drug or alcohol addiction to a religious addiction or to a health addiction, where they start looking. Right. Exactly, right? And so you're just sort of repositioning the mind to believe in something else and to follow that. What is to say that you can't do that on a scale? And again, if you look back to cults, this is true there. You're changing that mindset so you believe in something else, or that you follow something else, or that you find purpose in something else. Yeah, it's fascinating, and I'm so on the cusp of wanting to believe, but being afraid to actually believe, and maybe even going through the process to even prove something as simple as hypnosis myself. True, and I know like a Jimmy Church. I love listening to Jimmy Church. I think you listened to before. Fade to Black, great podcast. He's had a long-standing opinion or stance that he will not go under a past life regression because it's hypnosis, and he does not want to be hypnotized because he's mortified of it. I think he might have just lifted that recently, but I don't know how true or false that lift was, if it was just for show. But that was a long-standing thing for him. He just would not do it, and he's obviously got access to everybody in the world. Yeah, it's just technology's there, man, and knowing that the program has existed just scares the daylights out of me.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. One of the things that actually I just thought of when we were talking about Berkowitz and his dog, just going back to the whole serial killer thing, and I keep going back to that because that's kind of like my favorite subset of conspiracies within inside of MK Ultra.
It's the easiest to sort of tie into right now.
It is, right?
Outside of we don't know the clandestine operations to say, was that assassination?
Exactly. Right. Yeah, we're never going to find out the true scope of MK Ultra, and were they actually successful in creating a Manchurian candidate type assassinate or whatever it may be. We'll never know that information. So all we could really do is speculate on, hey, these are the experiments that you did. What were the byproducts of that? So so kind of going back and taking a look at that. One of the things that stood out to me when I got really into this MK Ultra and this theory of the serial killers was, but they're just killing random people, right? And so why would the CIA, why would the folks that are running MK Ultra want them to kill Bobby, who lives on 38th Street in the Bronx? Or that's a made up name, right? That just happened to be where David Berkowitz killed a lot of people. But then I thought to myself, well, maybe these were just tests, right? To your point, maybe these were just tests for a much larger, and maybe David Berkowitz himself was never meant to be that assassin. I mean, if you look at the guy. There's a fantastic documentary. I can't believe I'm doing it again. Netflix.
Sons of Sam, I think is the one.
Sons of Sam. It's called. Fantastic documentary. You look at David Berkowitz, and maybe this is great for an assassin because he's so unassuming, right? Maybe in our minds we think of those movies. You think of I know James Bond is a spy movie, right? But he surely could have assassinated a lot of people. But you have that stereotypical kind of fit dude who's going to go and take on the world, and be an assassin. If you look at David Berkowitz, he does not fit that mold in the slightest bit. Nor does Ted Kaczynski. Nor does Charles Manson. So maybe none of these people were meant to be that final product. They weren't meant to be the assassins themselves. Maybe they were just part of those experiments, and they wanted to see, hey, what could we do with this random Joe Schmo who finds himself in and out of prison since he's, 6 years old, in Manson's case. So, maybe that's it, man.
Jason Bourne.
There we go.
That's the string of movies I was thinking about before. If you haven't seen them, Tim, you got to watch them.
I've actually never seen them.
Action movies. Oh, so Matt Damon is in it, and the whole.
I like Matt Damon, dude. He's a good actor.
And that was early on in his career too, so he was still pretty young, especially in the first one. They had him come out, and Jeremy Renner, who was Hawkeye in the Marvel movies, actually came in, and he did one movie on. I think it was the Bourne Identities or Supremacy. I don't know. There's like four.
I was gonna say there's a whole bunch of them, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So he did it for one of the movies because the whole premise of Jason Bourne was that Jason Bourne wasn't actually Matt Damon. He thought he was Jason Bourne, but all of these assassins were actually all Jason Bourne. And they were MK Ultra'd for, if I'm going to verbalize that. Right.
I like it. Put it on a T-shirt.
Yeah, there we go.
Put it on a T-shirt
with Mr. Phillips. We've already got our merch coming up, guys.
Let's go, baby.
So that was the whole premise, and throughout this string of movies, the thing is like he's realizing what's happening. He's realizing what he's doing, and he's clicking out of it, and that's the whole progression. It's like by the end of it, he tries to like go back to a life and figure out who he actually is.
Right. And they don't care who they affect, right? I mean, for the greater good, for the greater good, they don't care. They've already shown that they'll compromise, the lives of American citizens. If you look back at Operation Artichoke, they released thousands of mosquitoes over some cities and infected people with dengue fever, some of which were fatal. Like, that's documented. That's true. That's not a conspiracy. That actually happened. So, I mean, who knows? They don't care.
Mind-boggling. Yeah, that's so sad, but I mean, that's sometimes the reality of these things is you find these little nuances that have literally been proven true. It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
Man, it's so crazy to me. But the Bourne thing, it's so set in modern times too, and it's just one of those things where like it kind of makes you think, could this still be going on right now? And to your point with Sons of Sam, I think that's exactly what I would assume as like an assassin, right? Is like
Right.
you don't want to be the Jason Bourne guy. Maybe you do. Maybe that's like your elite sniper guy, right? That's going out there and he's
Sure.
carrying out a bunch of stuff for you because maybe he doesn't have a home to go back to or parents are gone, and that's your ideal candidate. But in this case, I think it's like if you can get somebody that can walk up to somebody in the United States, even, right? Maybe you have a target right here that you can't send somebody that's like a super soldier out. You just want them to be unassuming. And I'll go back to Lee Harvey Oswald, very unassuming, and can walk into a library or a book repository, honestly. And nobody's really going to second guess it because he doesn't look the part. Nobody's going to look.
What's the difference between the two?
On the street. Yeah, like now if you saw this ripped guy that's running down there with a bulletproof vest on or something like that,
right,
shredded shirt, that guy's going to be a little more suspicious than this little like shrimpy guy, this little like chubby overweight guy. Yeah, man, I think that is, and I don't know if it's because that was a test on the tactics or if it was a test on the guy, but that would be where my mind would go, is that you need to find somebody that you can kind of pin on it. And I can't help but think, honestly, Las Vegas shooter, Stephen Paddock.
Dude, we got to do an episode on that.
That'll deserve its own episode in and of itself because there's a lot of conspiracies around that.
Yeah.
But MK Ultra is one of those conspiracies itself because you got a guy, no history of violence, that all of a sudden just opens up shooting that's got thousands of rounds. He somehow got into a hotel room and broke out a window that really shouldn't be opening. There's just a lot of sketchiness around that. And one of the conspiracies I saw was there's a Saudi prince that was supposed to be there or went there or something really great. Now, if you're the U.S. and you're the CIA and you have knowledge of some dealings or you want to destabilize a nation, you execute a Saudi prince or you assassinate him and you make it under the guise of like a mass murder. Wouldn't an MK Ultra thing be the perfect way to do that?
Sure.
Maybe that's what he was supposed to be there for. And they positioned it like he was this crazy guy that was coming in there because then the suspicion is gone. If a guy walks up and assassinates somebody, then you got to look for a motive and you got to look for why that person, you look for all the people around that person. But if that person was a casualty of a bigger event, the motive is simple. You write out some sort of a bullshit manifesto and you hand that all of a sudden that manifesto is like taped up on their bathroom window.
Right, and that becomes the official narrative.
So easy to find it, and
exactly
all of a sudden,
right. It was sitting there waiting on the coffee table when the FBI got there, and
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people really. Again, I don't know. I've never been to that person, fortunately, but I don't think people just kind of do that and post up their thoughts and make it really easy for everybody to find, or post up this video where somebody miraculously, guy's never posted a YouTube video before in his life, and all of a sudden he's got one, and somebody found it on the internet. That's his written manifesto. It's hard.
Right. No, you're absolutely right.
But we will definitely go into a Vegas shooter one.
Oh, I love the Vegas shooter. That one's phenomenal. I think that I agree with you. I think that it could have potentially been, and I don't want to get too deep into it because that's not what this is about, but it very well could have been a hit on the Saudi prince. There's helicopters involved. There's a lot of crazy shit going on with that. So that's one of my favorite ones. We'll get into that at some point.
Yeah.
One of the things that we talked about, human experimentation as it pertained to MK Ultra. The U.S. government has, and the CIA, and all these three-letter agencies have taken on a lot of criticism over the years for Operation Paperclip, as we talked about earlier, which was essentially taking Nazi scientists from World War II, bringing them over to the U.S. By the way, the Soviets did the exact same thing, right? They tried to get as many as they could as well. So, they did the same stuff. But, we took those. I mean, Werner von Braun, I don't know if I pronounced his name correctly, was literally, he was NASA, right? Like, so we know that we use these science to better our society, to better our science, and things like that. So that did happen. And what did the Nazis do in these camps? What did they do in places like Dachau, right? Human experimentation. So was MK Ultra just kind of a continuation of those human experiments that the Nazis were doing? I don't know, but it's to me, when you look at the timeline and we brought all of those scientists over, and then all of a sudden we create Operation Paperclip a decade later, not Paperclip, I'm sorry, MK Ultra a decade later, it's, the two kind of go hand in hand. If not to say that they necessarily were the ones that were running the show, so to speak, but
Right.
was the CIA influenced by things that they learned from these scientists and what they were doing in
Right.
those camps over in Germany and Poland and all across Europe at the time? Very well could have been the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it kind of flipped gears back to current time. This is something that I thought of as you and I were just kind of talking and doing this right now. So MK Ultra, what did they use, right? They used psychologic drugs. They used LSD. They used mushrooms. They tried using cocaine. They tried using marijuana. It didn't really work very well. They used drugs. It's 2024, baby. What does Elon want to put in your head? I don't, I know you're a big Elon guy. Love Elon. I don't know what it's called off the top of my head, right? What could occur now or in the future that they don't have to torture somebody to do this, but simply implant something into you and turn you into that Manchurian candidate, right? Like, that's a scary thought. And while I think and again, not that I think that Elon is doing that, I don't want anybody to misconstrue what I'm saying here. I don't think that's his motive at all in the slightest bit, but the technology exists.
Technology, right.
So when that technology falls into the hands of somebody who does want to use it maliciously and for things like that, how easily can it be done?
So the company is called Neuralink.
There it is. I almost called it Starlink, but I knew that wasn't right.
Well, Starlink is their internet company, so same basic company, same basic premise, or not company, same basic idea. And so Neuralink, what they do is they're implanting chips in your head that, I'm going to oversimplify this for the sake of demonstration, is it basically connects to like the tissues, the fibers within your brain, and fires them off. And so their human trial, they were able to allow a paraplegic to play chess online, and all he has to do is think about controlling the pieces.
And that's awesome, right? That's so friggin' cool, right? Like, I think that's fantastic.
Right, and they're not the only company doing this, and they're not even the furthest along. They're just the most popularized because it's Elon, and there's a lot more press around it. But I mean, there's the other trials coming up are, and I think they might have even done this one, is to allow somebody who has never seen before in their life to fix the neurons that are connecting to their eyes so they will be able to see. And then the idea is to allow a paraplegic to walk. And it's effectively nanotech that is rewiring the brain to allow you to gain function back, motor function that you didn't have. The long-term goal, now that you've learning how to operate in the brain, is exactly that, is like, well, what if I can download an encyclopedia and shove it in my brain? And now you just know knowledge. You don't have to Google something. You don't have to check.
Right. It's instant.
Just, like, blink your eyes and all of a sudden it's there. But to your point,
right?
I don't even think that it necessarily has to be the government implanting something in your brain so much as they can hack it. And that's obviously a big concern about it. Is can this technology get hacked and be overridden? So there's a journey to go. I think the technology is a little far away from there. It will probably be there in our lifetime, unquestionably to some degree. But it's, I mean, again, everything that we know, the government could be operating behind the scenes and at a much faster pace.
Yeah, well, look, we know that they do, right? I mean, it's,
right. Without the internet was a government tool for a decade before we got exposure.
Right, exactly.
You never really know.
Right.
I got one for you here. Have you ever heard of social engineering?
I'm sure I have, without sounding like a fool and trying to take a guess. What is it, my friend?
Effectively, what I'm getting at is...
By the way, hold on, pause. Wait, it's Cocktails and Conspiracies. Where's your cocktail, dude?
Cocktail and Conspiracies. I've been drinking it every time.
Good God, all right. You scared me, man.
Every
You're
time.
going to make me look like All right, good. All right, good. Go ahead. Didn't mean to cut you off there.
I take a drink. I can't do both at the same time. All right, so social engineering is effectively the art of changing people's minds using social influence, whether that's social media, whether it's news, whether it's anything else like that.
Sure.
And there was a huge...
like how you have to stand 6 feet apart because, some terrible bug is going to kill you and your whole family? Yeah.
There you go.
That
could be a product of that.
Yeah.
There was this huge documentary actually leaked, big conspiracy, big whistleblower that came out, how the U.S., among other countries, do it. There were certain companies that were collecting data points, and they were using that to influence different areas of the world, most specifically influencing elections in like third world countries or smaller countries to be the way they want. They convinced through, I think, like hip hop music, I forgot the country off the top of my head, to basically get all black kids to not vote in that particular election so they can get, I guess the Hispanic kids to vote so they can get a specific person in there. Convinced that they literally had a hip hop campaign where they were saying voting is not cool, and they talked about it. And I think it might have been in Haiti or somewhere in like the Caribbean. I think, again, don't hold me to that, but that was the basic gist of it. Is social engineering all that really is manipulation, and it now happens on a grand scale, and it is evidence. This is not, again, conspiracy. We know for a fact that we as the United States have used this to influence other elections. There's a lot of talk about media distrust, and if you can look at the Twitter files and how the government is impacted there now, that is controlling the flow of information, so it is different. However, the psychological aspects of social engineering, of mass media manipulation, right? What does that make you think of when you think of like the Soviet times and you think of propaganda? What is propaganda? Is that a byproduct? Not propaganda of itself, but this social engineering, a byproduct of MK Ultra. Is that a way that in the midst of all this, in the midst of studying the human brain and driving some of these people crazy, driving Lee Harvey Oswald crazy, driving Charles Manson crazy, like, well, we don't need to just go and use these guys as assassins. But what we can do is we can control the general population by feeding them into these specific ideas, changing their minds by curating content. There's been talks that, the movies that we see, the subject matters that we get in our TV shows, that sometimes that's being curated or funded by specific government programs to implant ideas in our head. They always talk about with the aliens. Are they softening us up because they're doing that?
Project Blue Beam, yeah.
Right. Obama just released that movie about the end of the world. I forgot what it's called off the top of my head. It was a really good movie, actually.
What program? What was it on? What streaming service?
No, I don't want to say it. I'm not going to give him any more props here. No. We've already done it twice, but I'll say it one last time for you. Do the sponsorship, guys. Netflix, you've been hitting it on all cylinders so far.
I think that was 4 times, by the way.
So I don't remember the title of the movie. I think it's When the World Ends or When the World Stops, something to that degree.
Yeah.
About, a cyber attack that could happen and all these like sequence of events, which is very real to happen. And
sure.
There's now talks after that cargo ship hit the bridge, which is literally a similar event happens in the movie. Is that priming us up and desensitizing us to certain things and certain mindsets? And you've seen that shift in culture throughout the years. Star Trek, X-Men. All those shows were about was honestly racial inequality, and they were just doing it in a different way. And
sure,
I posture that question to you, and I've used that word posture like 4 times today, but I'm happy with it. I'm going to keep using it. I'm going to throw that question to you: is social engineering or any sort of mass media manipulation, does it exist, and is it a byproduct of MK Ultra? Are they trying to implement that on a grand scale?
Yeah, look, right? There's no way to say that, yes, that was a byproduct of MK Ultra. I think that whether MK Ultra was successful or not, they learned a lot of stuff from doing it, right? Like, it went on for decades, right? There was a vast amount of information that was learned by these 3-letter organizations about mind control, about how to control people, about how to essentially control the masses, because that's what all of this is about anyway, right? Why do you want to assassinate somebody in the first place? Because you want to eventually control the masses. That's what all of this is about to begin with. So yeah, I think it's very plausible, if you will, that something was learned during those experiments over all of those decades to all of these people that could have eventually led to things like social engineering. And to answer the second part of your question, dude, absolutely it's real. Absolutely. It's so easy. It's so I know we're supposed to be the conspiracy realists, right? And I don't want to say it's real in terms of, yes, it's happening and these are the people that are doing it. I couldn't tell you that. But it's real in a sense that if somebody wanted to, they could do it very easily. And even if you just utilized social networking, right? If you just utilize social media, if that's all you utilized, boom, you're done right there. Who doesn't have this sitting in their pocket, right? With, 4 different social media apps on it. And you probably use most of those apps more than anything else. Let's be honest. Most people, right? Most people use that more so than anything else. And if we want to, and I know that's the whole social media thing is a little bit different than the social engineering, but I feel kind of strongly that the two of them are really very closely connected, because really, dude, that's the media now, right? I couldn't tell you the last time I went to foxnews.com or even really turn on the TV. What do? I go to X, right? And, I have the people that I follow. What's that?
In every election that we have, or really anything, but you always hear about bots and
Sure.
spam bots and Russian propaganda bots that are feeding. They've got farms that quite literally do that. I mean, I remember in one of the elections they were saying that 70% or something absurd of the most.
I think it might have been 16. Yeah.
2006. So of the most popular Christian groups were run by troll farms that were just meme producing.
Yeah, dude. Rogan talks about it like all the time. I feel like I know this story now, but you're absolutely right. I think it might be the top 20 Christian groups that are on Facebook are Russian bot farms.
Right. And that's just picking on one segment of people. Don't think it doesn't exist across the board in every genre, right? Or every niche, every community. And what are social media websites, the engineers that are working there, what are they getting paid for? They're trying to get paid, or they're trying to figure out how to keep you on social media more and more and more for longer. The reason you have likes is to get that jolt of serotonin in your brain, right? You get so happy. You post something on there, it's the first thing you do, refresh. How many people like it? I got more.
17 people like the picture of my burger from lunch.
Right. And then the more people like that, the more you just keep posting that content. I mean, that's the whole influencer culture that was built on. And don't think that is not the objective behind the scenes. These companies need to make money.
Right.
They're not getting seed money from their venture capitalists because they think it's a cool idea. They're getting money because they think they're going to make money on it.
Sure.
How do they make money is selling ads. And how do you sell ads? It's to get people to use the tools, use the websites. And how do you get them to use the sites? Well, that's what you're getting paid for. That's what you're trying to engineer. So I think you nailed it, honestly. Social engineering and social media are one and the same, in my opinion. And I think it's designed that way. And I think that's their goal. I mean, I don't want to lean too much on the mental illness stuff too much, or even the bullying too much. But from what we see is things like bullying is up, right? People feel more depressed. They feel more anxious now. That could be any number of reasons. And again, there's conspiracies around all of that. But in my personal opinion, a lot of that has to actually do with social media, is because you can't really escape the harrows of the hallway that you used to have in school.
Sure.
You didn't get along with somebody, you got picked on, or you did something stupid that everyone made fun of. It kind of goes away when you go home and you have an escape, and you don't have that anymore.
Right.
And so that weighs on your mind. And even our kids right now, I'm sure yours have done it. I know mine have. My kids say, oh, I'm going to be a YouTuber when I grow up. They saw a video of me for my business online, and they think I'm a YouTuber because it was a video that was online, and they think I'm a big YouTuber now. Maybe you guys will make us a YouTuber out there because we're going to make this podcast so popular. But nevertheless, that's not the goal, right? That's goals now for these young kids. Is everybody's out there making these stupid videos where they're slapping people across the head trying to prank video, and they're trying to become famous, to get rich quick schemes. They've just materialized.
Right.
It's a byproduct of warping people's minds to believe that this is a path. And it is, don't get me wrong, content creation is absolutely legitimate.
Right.
People are consuming it. But what's the first thing? And this is a hat tip to my buddy Chris Van Vliet out there, the full-time creator mastermind, and some of the guests we've had come on there. And a lot of what we talk about is you got to hook somebody in 3 seconds. That's it. You got 3 seconds to make somebody stop and watch your stuff. So that's why you see people go outlandish and outrageous and have these ridiculous. You don't understand how much effort goes into the thumbnail that goes in the videos. And for the people watching, pay attention to that.
Right.
What's making you watch that video? And don't think again, these are people combing through this. A guy like Mr. Beast didn't get that popular because he threw something at the wall and it stuck. He is overthinking this stuff to the max. And how can he engineer his content for you to stop and watch? And everybody else is doing the same. If we're doing it as layman people to watch a simple show on YouTube, what about these big companies? Why is the news now showing more murders, showing more chaos, showing more craze? This, again, isn't a conspiracy. This is fact that the news stations outright said, we need drama. You can outright make up stories. There are former news producers that are out there saying, we were told to just straight up make up stories if it made people watch us more.
Yeah. Well, dude, look at the story. I don't know which news network it was. It was probably CNN. I don't give a shit. I'll say it.
Anyway, so
not a fan. But actually, I don't think it was. But there was a news network that released a story during COVID, saying that gunshot victims were waiting in the hallways because the unvaxxed were, clogging up and taking up so many resources in those hospitals. And that we know that was a complete bullshit story. It was legitimately made up.
Right. But it drew ratings, and then ratings drew advertisements, and that's what it all comes down to.
Exactly.
So, again, the original point kind of bringing us back in here, could they be doing that on a mass scale? I don't know if it's a byproduct, but to pretend it's not happening,
could be.
I almost think would be a little naive, a little ignorant, because we know it is. We know it is. To what degree? I don't know. We'll let you decide out there. It is real, man. It's so crazy just to kind of think about. It's literally the stuff of movies. It's in movies, right? It's the principal factoid of movies.
I mean, The Manchurian Candidate is quite literally about. It's literally about MK Ultra. It's literally about an assassin.
It's assumed to be true by the general public. And I mean, I think people think sometimes when people know things are true because it doesn't impact their lives directly, people tend to sort of push it off to the side, and then maybe that's how it gets the classification as a conspiracy theory. But I think a lot of people will be surprised to actually hear that, oh no, MK Ultra and mind control is a real thing. Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. This happened. It happened here in the United States, and it happened within your parents' lifetimes, generally. Unless your parents are young or you're a young audience watching this, but you should be 18, I hope, according to YouTube policy. But
I agree.
I mean, it's a wild story, and I think this is going to really unlock a lot of other ones for us here. As we when we talked about Las Vegas shooter a little bit there, we've got obviously JFK is the big one, and even Sons of Sam or Son of Sam. I use Sons as the
but it might have been Sons. It might have been Sons. We'll wait until we get into that one, but it might have been Sons, plural.
Be another spin-off there, too.
Yeah, dude.
There's so many fun ones that can come out of this. And MK Ultra, you're going to find, if you stick around with us, and when you start to see some of these other episodes, that you always come back to this idea of hypnosis and mind control or some sort of an outside influence. And yes, you can always blame it on somebody just being crazy.
Sure.
But how many people in your life do you know that just snapped? Just snapped. I mean, I know one who snapped a couple times, a handful of times, but how many people do you know that just went completely off the rocker? Obviously, I'm not saying a serial killer, but it is hard to just break one day. I'm not saying it doesn't happen.
And break to that extent, right? Break to that extent where now all of a sudden you are, you're showing signs of not just severe mental illness, but you have these just bizarre, no other way to explain it, but there's just this bizarre ideology, right? Yeah. Where did that come from? That all of a sudden one day, that's it? Where did that come from? So, to me, that's part of the outlier.
I want to just kind of circle back before we wrap things up here on a point you made before, and I'm trying to just rehash the point really quickly, and it's your exact verbiage is actually completely slipping my mind now on what it was. I'll leave it at that because I can't think of your exact verbiage. It's not going to make sense without it. So we'll leave it at that. And I think we'll just we can kind of wrap things up here. Tim, any final thoughts on MK Ultra here? Yeah.
So I think, last time we talked a lot about the octopus murders, and we talked about how that was just a tangled web of, it's almost like a Russian nesting doll of conspiracies inside one another. I think that this is certainly, I shouldn't say I know, this is not going to be the last time that we talk about MK Ultra, right? Mm-hmm. The more that you take a real deep dive into MK Ultra, the more fascinating it gets. So, this is not going to be the last time that we talk about this. We're going to talk about this a lot in the future.
We're going to create our own little octopus, our own little spider web, whatever we're going to coin for that. We'll throw that on.
Let's go, baby.
Too, later down the line. So, I mean, I'll wrap up here and say, as we close the chapter on today's journey, reminded that the world is a tapestry woven through the threads. There's my tie-in right there of the known and the unknown. And I think in the quest of truth, we often find more questions than answers, and the stories we explore are the whisper in our grand chorus of history's mysteries. Remember, in the library of the unexplained, every book holds a secret, and always remember that in the world of mysteries, the only thing more intriguing than the questions are the stories as they unravel. So until next time, keep your mind open, but don't let your brain fall out.